In a small village where the rivers sang to the winds and the acacia trees whispered secrets, lived a woman named Amara. She was known throughout the village for her gentle heart, her hard-working hands, and a smile that could calm even the most restless child. Amara had married Obasi, a man who, by all appearances, seemed to be the perfect husband, strong, successful, and respected among traders who crossed the dusty paths from town to town. Together, Amara and Obasi were seen as a blessed couple. Their compound was filled with laughter, their granary was always full, and the elders often said, "May all unions be as peaceful as Amara and Obasi's." But not every storm shows itself in the sky. One planting season, Amara's younger sister, Zuri, came to live with them. Zuri was the kind of beauty that made even the river pause to admire her reflection. Her skin glowed like polished ebony, and her eyes held a spark that could warm or burn, depending on who crossed her path. Zuri's engagement had recently broken off under mysterious circumstances. She arrived at Amara's home with nothing but a small woven basket and a tale of a man who did not deserve her. Amara, with her boundless kindness, welcomed Zuri into their home without question. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Zuri helped with chores, shared stories by the fire, and laughed heartily at Obasi's jokes. But soon, subtle changes began to appear, changes so delicate that only the heart could feel them. Obasi, who once rushed home to share every tale of his trading adventures with Amara, now returned later than usual. When he did, his eyes seemed to linger longer on Zuri, and his conversations with Amara became shorter, colder, and filled with irritation over trivial matters. At first, Amara brushed it aside. Perhaps business is troubling him, she told herself. But the heart has a way of knowing when its place is being stolen, even if the mind tries to deny it. Zuri, on the other hand, had mastered the art of innocence. In front of Amara, she acted like a devoted sister. She called her dada with sweetness that dripped like honey, but behind closed doors, her whispers with Obasi grew more frequent, and their shared glances spoke louder than any village drum. The village began to murmur. Old women at the market would pause as Amara passed by, their eyes filled with sympathy they dared not voice aloud. Children, innocent in their questions, once asked her, "Mama Amara, why does Uncle Obasi laugh more with Auntie Zuri than with you?" Each night, Amara sat by the cooking fire, staring at the orange embers, wondering where her once joyful marriage had vanished. Her heart ached, but she remained silent, holding on to the hope that it was just a phase, a fleeting shadow that would pass. But shadows, when ignored, tend to grow. One evening, as the village prepared for the full moon festival, Amara was arranging calabashes in the storeroom when she heard faint laughter drifting from the back of the compound. It was Zuri's laugh, soft, teasing, and far too familiar. Obasi's voice followed, murmuring something that made Zuri giggle even more. Amara's hands froze over the calabashes. Her heart pounded, not with anger, but with a deep, suffocating sadness. She tiptoed towards the sound, her footsteps as light as the whispers she heard. Behind the storeroom, in a corner shielded by banana leaves, she saw them. Obasi stood close to Zuri, his hand brushing against her cheek, their faces so close that the truth became undeniable. For a moment, Amara felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. Yet, she did not scream. She did not cry. She turned silently, her heart heavier than it had ever been. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the smiles, the shared memories, and the trust that had been silently broken. That night, as the village danced under the full moon, Amara sat alone, staring into the empty sky. The man she had loved was slipping through her fingers, and the sister she had protected was the very one carving wounds into her soul. But Amara did not know that this was just the beginning. The betrayal she had witnessed was only a seed that would soon sprout into a dark truth far beyond her imagination. The days that followed were the longest of Amara's life. Morning after morning, she watched as Obasi grew more distant. He no longer asked about her well-being, no longer noticed when her hands were cracked from grinding millet, nor when her eyes, once filled with light, had dulled with sleepless nights. Zuri, however, bloomed. She walked through the compound with a confidence that seemed to grow with each passing day, her laughter filling the air like a mocking bird. But Amara remained silent. She held her pain like a secret, buried deep within her chest. She believed that perhaps, if she waited, Obasi would remember the woman who had stood beside him when he had nothing, the woman who had carried water on her head so he could rest his tired feet. But some men, once blinded by desire, lose sight of the hands that built their foundation. The village was no longer silent. Gossips bloomed like wildflowers. At the market, women whispered behind woven baskets. "Did you see Zuri wearing Obasi's red shawl yesterday? I heard she was seen entering his room long after Amara had gone to sleep." Amara heard these whispers. She felt them. But she carried herself with grace, never allowing her sorrow to spill in front of watching eyes. Zuri, however, was no longer content with quiet whispers and hidden glances. She had tasted the thrill of betrayal, and like a snake tasting the air, she wanted more. She began to belittle Amara in subtle ways, commenting on how tired she looked, how perhaps Obasi needed someone livelier, someone who could match his ambitions. Obasi listened. He began comparing the two sisters openly. "Zuri understands me, Amara. She has ideas about expanding my trade. You're content with these village ways." Each word felt like a stone against Amara's heart. This was not just betrayal by a husband, it was a knife turned by her own blood. The final blow came when Obasi began spending entire nights away from home. At first, he claimed it was business. But when the village boys saw him and Zuri walking together under the starlit sky, their hands brushing in ways no brother-in-law and sister-in-law ever should, the truth could no longer hide. One evening, unable to bear the growing ache in her soul, Amara approached Zuri while she was combing her hair by the moonlight. "Zuri," Amara said, her voice trembling, "why are you doing this? I have given you my home, my trust, my love. Why are you trying to take what is mine?" Zuri looked up, her lips curling into a smile that had no warmth. "What is yours, Dada? A man's heart cannot be owned like a cooking pot. If Obasi's eyes find me, perhaps it is you who should ask why you've become invisible to him." Amara's heart clenched. She had never seen such coldness in her sister's eyes. "You are my sister, Zuri," Amara whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Sisters do not destroy each other." Zuri's gaze sharpened. "You are too simple, Dada. This world does not reward simple women. I will not live a life like yours, bound to a man who grows bored, stuck in a village that worships silence. I want more, and if Obasi is my path to that life, so be it." That night, for the first time, Amara realized Zuri's betrayal was not born out of love for Obasi, but out of something darker, an insatiable hunger for power, for control. As the days passed, Obasi became a shadow of the man he once was. His laughter was forced, his temper sharp. He no longer cared for the farm, nor did he notice when Amara would sit outside, weaving baskets until her fingers bled. One afternoon, while returning from the river, Amara saw something that shattered any hope she had left. In a hidden clearing, just beyond the tall reeds, she spotted Zuri and Obasi, their bodies close, their lips locked in an embrace that was meant for lovers, not betrayers. The pain was sharp, but it was not new. It was a pain that had been building quietly, waiting to break free. But Amara did not cry. She turned away, her steps firm, her heart heavy yet strangely clear. This was no longer a matter of a broken marriage. It was no longer about losing her husband. It was about losing her sister to a darkness she could not yet understand. And while the village watched in hushed curiosity, Amara knew she could no longer remain silent. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Zuri's deception was not born from mere jealousy or spite. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. But Amara didn't know the darkest secret was yet to come. The winds began to change. The once cheerful songs of the village women seemed quieter. The elders who used to greet Amara with smiles now looked at her with eyes full of concern, as if they knew something they dared not speak aloud. But it wasn't pity alone that filled the air, it was fear. Fear that something unnatural was stirring within the walls of Amara's home. Amara had always believed that love, even when wounded, could heal. But now, she began to feel a strange presence, a coldness that seemed to linger in the corners of her compound long after the sun had set. It wasn't just Obasi's betrayal or Zuri's poison-tipped words, it was something more, something that chilled the bones. One morning, as Amara swept the front yard, she noticed something odd beneath the baobab tree. A small bundle wrapped in red cloth, tied with black twine, lay hidden among the roots. Curious yet cautious, she opened it. Inside were items that sent shivers down her spine: a lock of Obasi's hair, a chicken's claw, and a small clay figure pierced with thorns. Her heart pounded. Such things were not tokens of affection. They were symbols of dark rituals. Amara quickly covered the bundle again, her mind racing. Who had placed it there? She didn't need to guess long. Her thoughts went straight to Zuri. That same evening, she sought out Mama Kemi, the village's oldest healer. A woman of wisdom and sharp eyes that had seen more seasons than most. If anyone could make sense of what Amara had found, it was her. Sitting in the healer's hut, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs, Amara laid the bundle before Mama Kemi. The old woman's face darkened as she examined the items. "Child," she whispered, "this is not the work of jealous hearts. This is the hand of a woman walking the path of Obanj, one who seeks power through dark spirits." Amara's throat tightened. "Zuri, my sister, she would never." Mama Kemi's eyes narrowed. "Your sister is dancing with forces that demand sacrifice." The failed engagement she fled from, it was no simple heartbreak. Word reached my ears that her previous suitor fell ill without cause, his mind lost in a fog, until he vanished from his family. And now, your husband walks the same path. Amara felt the room spin. The whispers in the village, the strange men visiting Zuri late at night, the growing sickness in Obasi's eyes, it all began to make a sinister kind of sense. But why? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Kemi sighed deeply. Power. There are women who seek to rise not through patience or hard work, but by bending others to their will. Zuri's beauty is her mask, but beneath it, she is a vessel for spirits that feed on betrayal, envy, and lust. Your husband is no longer in control of his desires, child. He is ensnared. Amara's heart shattered, but amidst the sorrow, a new flame ignited: determination. She had spent weeks swallowing her pain, hoping this storm would pass. But now she knew, this was no storm. It was a curse, and it was growing stronger. What can I do, Mama Kemi? Amara asked, her fists clenched. How do I save him? The old healer looked at her with a mixture of sadness and admiration. The path will not be easy. The spirits Zuri has called upon are greedy. They will not release Obasi willingly. But they fear purity, the kind that cannot be faked or bought. You, Amara, hold that strength. You must confront her, not with anger, but with the truth of her own reflection. Amara nodded, though fear trembled in her chest. Mama Kemi gave her protective herbs and whispered prayers to shield her heart. She warned Amara to watch Zuri closely, for the closer the ritual night approached, the bolder Zuri would become. True to Mama Kemi's words, Zuri's behavior grew stranger in the days that followed. She was no longer hiding her hold over Obasi. She sat at the family table as if she were the wife, giving orders to the servants, deciding which traitors Obasi should meet, and openly mocking Amara's silence. Obasi, once proud and strong, now moved like a man trapped in a fog. His skin paled, his laughter sounded hollow, and his eyes, once filled with life, seemed glassy, as if watching a world that no longer belonged to him. One night, as the village slept, Amara followed Zuri silently. Through narrow pathways, past the sleeping goats, and towards the dense forest where shadows danced under the moonlight. There, beneath an ancient fig tree, Amara saw her sister kneeling before a strange altar, chanting words that no human tongue should utter. In her hands, Zuri held a small figure carved in Obasi's likeness, its chest pierced with a bone needle. Amara's heart broke at the sight, but she did not retreat. She knew now that her battle was not just for her husband, but for her sister's very soul. The dark secret was no longer hidden. It had begun to surface, and Amara was ready to face it. The night was thick with silence, but in Amara's heart, a storm was brewing. After witnessing Zuri's dark ritual beneath the fig tree, Amara knew time was slipping away. Obasi's life was hanging by a thread, and if Zuri's spell was completed, there would be no saving him. But how does a woman fight an enemy who hides behind a sister's face?
How does one rescue a man who no longer sees his own chains? Amara returned home before dawn, her mind racing. She could not face this battle alone. The next morning, she went to the widow's courtyard, a sacred place where the village's elder women gathered. These women, once brushed aside as old and frail, were in truth the keepers of ancient knowledge, guardians of stories and rituals long forgotten by the younger generation. Among them was Mama Olamide, a woman whose words could still a quarrel with a mere glance. When Amara poured out her heart, revealing Zuri's betrayal and the dark path she had chosen, the elders listened in heavy silence. "This is no longer just about a man and his foolishness," Mama Olamide said, her voice firm. "This is a battle for the soul of our village. If we allow such darkness to root here, it will not stop with Obasi." The women agreed to help Amara, not with weapons, but with purity rituals passed down through generations. Rituals that could break enchantments not through violence, but through truth and light. The elders began preparations immediately. They gathered white kola nuts, cowrie shells, palm oil, and most importantly, the ashes of the yarako tree, known for its power to reveal hidden truths. They instructed Amara to cleanse herself with river water and to wear only a simple white cloth, a symbol of her untainted spirit. Meanwhile, Zuri continued her charade, acting as though she already ruled the household. She would call Obasi to her side with a snap of her fingers, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. The villagers watched but said nothing, too afraid of the strange aura that seemed to follow her. But Amara watched too, not with sadness now, but with resolve. The ritual night arrived. It was the new moon, a night when shadows had no rivals, and Zuri believed her power would reach its peak. She told Obasi to meet her at the fig tree after sunset, claiming she had a special ceremony to bless their future. Obasi, lost in his trance, obeyed without question. But Zuri did not know that Amara and the elder women were already waiting. Hidden among the thick bushes, Amara and the elders observed as Zuri, dressed in a blood-red cloth, began her chants. She held the carved figure of Obasi, now decorated with fresh chicken blood, and as she danced around the altar, her voice rose in a language that chilled the bones. When the moment of sacrifice came, when Zuri was about to pierce the figure's heart with a bone dagger, Amara stepped forward. "Zuri," she called, her voice echoing through the trees. The chanting stopped. Zuri turned, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You dare interrupt a ritual you cannot comprehend?" Zuri hissed, her eyes gleaming with unnatural fire. Amara did not flinch. The elder women emerged behind her, their presence like a wall of wisdom and power. Mama Olamide stepped forward, holding the yarako ashes in her palm. "This is not the way, child," Mama Olamide said. "You have invited spirits that will consume you, not serve you." But Zuri was beyond listening. She raised the dagger high, aiming for the clay figure's heart. Amara acted swiftly. She stepped between Zuri and the altar, holding a mirror wrapped in yarako ashes. The mirror was said to reflect not the face, but the true soul of a person. As Zuri's eyes fell upon her reflection, a scream tore from her throat. In that moment, the spirits that had fed on her envy and desire were forced to reveal their hold over her. Zuri's body convulsed, her form trembling as dark shadows slithered from her skin, evaporating into the night air. The ground seemed to shake, and the trees rustled as if sighing in relief. Obasi, who had been standing like a lifeless doll, collapsed to his knees, gasping as though waking from a terrible dream. Zuri, now free from the dark spirits, crumbled to the ground, weeping. Her face no longer carried the mask of arrogance, only a hollow, broken expression. "I only wanted to be more than a shadow," she whispered. "I was tired of being the forgotten sister." Amara's heart ached, not with anger, but with sorrow. "And yet, in trying to shine, you dimmed the very light you had." The elder women gathered Zuri, cradling her as one would cradle a lost child. They knew the path of atonement would be long, but at least, it had begun. As for Obasi, shame had replaced the fog in his eyes. He could not meet Amara's gaze. But forgiveness is not a gift that can be demanded, it is earned, sometimes through a lifetime of regret. But Amara, she had already made her choice. She had fought for the soul of her family, but now, she would fight for herself. The trap of the dark secret had been broken, but the story was not yet over. The night of the ritual had passed, but its echoes lingered.
In the days that followed, the village was no longer filled with whispers of betrayal but with hushed conversations about truths long buried. The tale of Zuri's dark secret had spread, not as gossip, but as a cautionary lesson, a lesson of how unchecked envy and the hunger for power could rot even the purest of hearts. Zuri was taken into the care of the village elders, who began the long process of cleansing her spirit. Each morning, she would sit beneath the ancient iroko tree, wrapped in white cloth, forced to reflect on the pain she had caused. Her laughter was no longer a weapon, but a quiet, sorrowful song of regret.
Obasi, too, was not spared.
He roamed the village like a man who had awoken from a terrible dream, only to realize the destruction his sleepwalking had caused. He tried to return to the life he once had, tending to his trade, greeting villagers with forced smiles, but the weight of his betrayal followed him like a shadow.
One afternoon, Obasi approached Amara as she was weaving mats outside her hut.
The sun was setting, casting a soft glow that made her look like a queen draped in gold. "Amara," he said, his voice low, "I am not worthy of your forgiveness.
But I am here to beg for it."
Amara looked up, her eyes calm, but firm.
"Forgiveness is not a fruit you can pluck with empty hands, Obasi.
It is a seed that grows only in those who understand the weight of their actions."
Obasi fell to his knees. "I was blind." Amara stood, dusting her hands. "No, Obasi. You chose blindness.
You had eyes, but you preferred to be led by desire. And now you seek to see again, but the damage is done." The villagers watched from a distance, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. They knew they were witnessing the strength of a woman who had been torn apart, yet stood taller than before.
Obasi's voice trembled. "What must I do to make things right?" Amara's gaze softened, but her resolve did not. "You must rebuild, Obasi.
Not for me, not for appearances, but for yourself. You must learn to be a man who does not need to break others to feel powerful." With that, she turned away, her steps light, her heart unburdened. Amara had fought not just for her marriage or her dignity, she had fought for her own soul. She had walked through betrayal, faced the shadows of dark magic, and emerged not as a victim, but as a woman who had claimed her worth.
Weeks turned into months.
Zuri, through the elders' guidance, began to understand the depth of her sins. The village, once ready to cast stones, now offered her silent prayers of healing. Redemption was not given easily, but the path was open to those who sought it with sincerity. As for Amara, life took on a new rhythm.
She no longer waited by the gate for Obasi's return.
Instead, she invested her time teaching young village girls the art of weaving and storytelling. She became a symbol, a living lesson that a woman's worth is not measured by the man who claims her, but by the strength of her spirit. One evening, under a sky painted with stars, Mama Olamide approached Amara with a small, carved gourd. "This," the elder said, "is a symbol of your journey. It once carried water, but now it carries wisdom.
May you always remember that even when emptied, a vessel can be filled again." Amara smiled, accepting the gourd.
Her heart was full, not with bitterness, but with peace.
In the end, Zuri's dark secret had not destroyed Amara.
It had revealed her true strength. Obasi remained in the village, forever shadowed by the weight of his betrayal, working to rebuild his name, knowing that trust, once broken, could never be fully mended. Zuri, humbled and cleansed, chose a life of service, helping the village healers, dedicating herself to righting the wrongs her hands had committed.
And Amara?
She stood tall, a queen not of wealth, but of wisdom. The villagers often spoke of her story, not with pity, but with reverence. They would say, "Amara taught us that betrayal is not the end of a woman's tale. Sometimes, it is the beginning of her legend."